what is it like when somebody calls you and wants to do a retrospective of your work? And what's the selection process like?
Oh, the first is she doesn't really mean it, it'll never happen. And perhaps she was thinking it was somebody else.
Imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome was the first one. Then the selection process, I got out a few things and put them on my studio table and thought, yeah, that's okay. And then I looked, and then you said, no, but I want a whole sweep of 15 years or something. And I looked at the sort of the video on the website of the gallery, and I thought, I'm going to need a bit more than this. So everything came out of all the top shelves and and I unrolled all of the drawings and I got everything out and made a big pile of things that I thought represented 15 years worth of work, and then changed my mind 5 times.
So we've talked a little bit about how when you have a retrospective exhibition that it gives you a chance to look at pieces of work that have become kind of discrete in your mind, that have become almost like encapsulated.
Yes.
And then here they suddenly are having a conversation with each other in the gallery. And how do you feel about that?
It's been really useful and helpful as an artist to see, as you say, it's like the 9 Women project, and then there's the Drawing Songs project, and then there's this project, and when it's finished, you kind of fold it all away and put it away, and you think, well, what will I do now? And although it is obviously connected to what you've done before, it's sort of, there's a line, you move on. And what happens when you get it all out again at the same time? And then, my studio's not very big. It was just like heaped on the table, literally, and on the floor. And, and I had a yes pile and a no pile and a maybe pile. And the difference seeing it all here is I start to see connections that I'd either forgotten or I never knew were there in the first place between, across that sweep of work.
So you said something there that I think is kind of interesting, the idea that you finish a body of work and you draw a line and you put it away and then you have to start something new. So talk a little bit about how that starting something new happens for you. Like what? Because it's like a big sigh of relief when you
absolutely, yes,
put an exhibition up, and then all of a sudden it's kind of a bit of a deflation when it all comes
there's always
down.
The post-show slump, isn't there? I think there's probably 2 things in this exhibition where I thought, oh yeah, that happened then, and it's the same as this, and that was after I'd done my MA, which was the children's clothes pieces there. I was aware that there was going to be a slump and decided to book a show a year from then, booked a gallery and thought, right, well, whatever I'm working on then, that's what I'll put in the show. And then I was so overwhelmed with all the work that had gone on in the 2 years doing my master's that I just started sewing up and down, very slow, meditative, repetitive. And that was those little garments that are sewn together with little bits of fabric. And it's after all of the elaborate embroidery and the sort of fierce, I've got a deadline thing, that was that sense of relief after that. And then just recently, after doing the Drawing Songs project, which was a funded project, which had a big exhibition and a release of music at the end and a performance and the gallery and all the trumpets, And after that, I thought, I don't know what to do. I didn't know what to do next. So my default setting is to draw. So I just carried on drawing, but I wanted to do something observational, something simple, something natural, to sort of feed the abstraction, if you like. I felt like I'd used everything up.
Yeah.
So I needed to feed it. So I started collecting twigs on my walks to the park, and just drawing them, cataloguing them really. And I'd sort of pick up loads and loads of them and pick out the most interesting and just draw them, just plain black ink on white paper, do sort of 5 or 6 on a page, and turn the page, collect a few more the next day, and then I'd got a sketchbook full of pen and ink drawings. I got a sketchbook full of pen and ink drawings, and then this bonfire of dead twigs on the table. And another thing I do when I'm at the end of a project is I put nice things on the table, nice fabric or bits and pieces to sort of stimulate a conversation. And I'd got some strips of silk, and I started wrapping the twigs in silk. When I started, it was like a nothing activity.
Right.
It was keeping my hands busy, and it was occupational therapy, and it was meditation, and I just kept wrapping. The wrapping took over from the drawing, and I just kept going. Yeah, so that there are those moments of pause between, and then this has sort of escalated far more quickly than I'd anticipated, really.
The twigs?
The twigs, yeah. That one took a longer time, but the twigs have sort of escalated into a project with a capital P.
Right.
Quite quickly, really.
Because I think, when you go to art college and somebody's always giving you an assignment, and you're always like racing against the deadline, and maybe they're not ideas that you're particularly interested in, but you have to generate some work. And then I think one of the difficult things when you transition is like, where does an idea for a piece of work come from? And if you don't feel like you have an idea, then what do you do in your studio all day? So
what do I do in my studio all day?
I mean, what do you do in your studio all day?
I make a lot of tea.
Right.
And I do a lot of staring out of the window as well. And I listen to lots of BBC podcasts and, just
Potter. Yeah.
Potter about. And then sometimes that's longer than, sometimes I only do that. But usually I'll sort of do that for an hour or so, and then I'll sort of start something, pick something up. So,
I mean, a lot of creatives talk about this idea that you have to just keep showing up and doing something.
Oh, yeah.
And then eventually the thing that you didn't think was anything turns out to be something after all. And
that's the twigs thing. But if you think, I haven't got an idea, I won't go to the studio, nothing ever turns up if you're not there.
Right.
Nothing's going to happen if I don't get myself in that space and play with something. Nothing's ever going to happen. I'll do the laundry or something.
I was going to say my default action is, I'll just procrastinate by cleaning my house. Yeah. Because...
And that's, I know... I am aware of the privilege of having a studio away from my house.
Right.
I'm aware that is a real great thing, a luxury that I've worked for. I haven't always had a studio away from the house. But the fact that you are going somewhere to work creates that switch in your brain, and the short journey from home to the studio, anything could be happening there, and it's not my problem anymore.
Right.
And I can sort of put my head down and get working.
So we talked, we joked a little bit about imposter syndrome, but do you also, do you have an issue with an inner critic? I mean, do you have an inner critic that says, well, that's not any good, what are you doing that for? Or do you think that after a certain amount of time you've found a way to put your critic to rest?
Yes, I think, sometimes I think everything's amazing. And that's a mistake, you know.
It's usually a warning sign.
It is, isn't it? Ding, ding, ding. Oh, this is amazing. Look how great I am. And it's usually because there's usually a seed of something in there that's
there is
pushing
actually
me
something
on. There is
amazing.
something amazing, or something that's worth pursuing. But you have to make a lot of whatever it is you're making to find the good stuff.
Right, and I think that's an idea that doesn't really translate into your college experience, because you make a thing and then you move on and you make another thing. Yeah. And it's really hard to realize that in order to make one good thing, you're probably going to have to make 50
it's the fertilizer. Nothing grows if you don't fertilize it.
Right.
So all of the rubbish, shall we say, is the fertilizer. All the stuff that you don't like, and that's where it grows from.
But you ever go back to some of those pieces and be like, oh, it didn't work for that, but actually there's still some ideas left in there. Do you keep a sketchbook?
I do keep a sketchbook. I generally have an at-home sketchbook, which sort of sits on the table by the chair that I sit on most of the time, and that gets just drawn into while I'm watching TV, which annoys my husband, because he then says, because I keep asking him, who's that? Because I've been drawing, who's he? So I'll draw at home, and then I usually have, like, the twigs were in a particular book that I specifically bought to draw twigs in, and then I have a small, sort of this size, in my handbag thing that I shove bits of paper in and scribble notes on, and it might be shopping lists, or it might be, drawings or ideas for blog posts or all sorts of stuff. Gets that, and that's like the working. Those are the people don't see those, right? Because that's
so that's interesting. So how do you feel about exhibitions of sketchbooks? Because
it depends. Every artist uses a sketchbook in a different way, don't they? I think. I've known a couple of artists whose sketchbooks were immaculately presented. But they made them to be looked at.
Right.
And I would argue that then that isn't a sketchbook, really. It's a piece of work.
Right.
And it's beautiful.
And it's in a book.
But it's not really a sketchbook. I think a sketchbook's a much more personal thing, really.
Yeah, agreed. So let's circle back around to the work in the exhibition. I think for some people walking into the exhibition, they're going to be like, okay, but what about the shed? I mean, when I've walked through with students, there are two things they ask me about. One, they love the shed. It's a great spot for a selfie, but they don't understand how the shed fits into everything else, and then they're really perplexed by the twigs. But we'll come back to the twigs. We'll start with the shed.
Start with the shed.
I think there's also a cultural barrier, perhaps, with the shed.
Yes. Every Englishman worth his salt has or wants a shed. And I say Englishman because it is very masculine space generally. It's got the lawnmower, it might have bicycles in it, it's got a workbench and tools and compost and, man stuff. So it happened at a time when I was unsure of what to do as an artist, and I'd been working in a school with children. I didn't really know what to do with them particularly, or myself, so I thought I'll go on a course, because that's always the answer, isn't it?
As somebody else.
I'll go on a course, and I joined the artist teacher scheme thinking that it would enable me to teach better, understand what my role was better as an artist in school. But what it actually did eventually was make me stop
that
teaching.
You were an artist.
Yes. So the shed was really the first bit of work that I did on that course that made me feel that it was mine. It wasn't, it came straight out of my head, not a prompt from someone else or a tutor or a mentor or anything. And I was just sort of sat at home in the garden on a lovely autumn day. My husband had gone to the football, and I had this idea that I could, because I'd been working with fabric and quilts, and I thought I could quilt the shed. And I'd been looking at the fact that the work that I'd been taking in, I felt very self-conscious about, because it was very domestic, very female, very... and I got the impression that everybody else thought that too, but that might be just my perception of it. I don't know. But I thought, I'm going to cover the shed in fabric. I'm just going to do it. So I did it while he was at the football, and it took him 3 days to notice. So, and it was great. I just felt it was a watershed. It was a point at which everything changed. And so then, having done my shed, I started asking other people if I could do their sheds. And then I did some sheds on an allotment. Do you know what an allotment is? So it's like vegetable gardens, and you rent the land from the council.
So Jamestown has a community garden program, which is similar.
Yes, yeah. So you have your little plot alongside lots of other people's little plots. And I did some sheds on that allotment on the top of a hill in Stoke-on-Trent, and they looked amazing, and the photographs were great, and I just thought, this is really great. I did loads of sheds. And then I won't go into the whole story because it's really boring, but someone contacted me and said, I really like your sheds. Can I do a music video in one of them? And I said, well, no, you can't really, because they're other people's sheds. They're full of stuff, and quite a lot of them are a bit rickety and dangerous and what have you. But he was quite determined, and we had several cups of coffee, over which, this was Dan Whitehouse, it's a singer-songwriter, and he's on the 9 Women video. And we decided to make a shed specifically for performance. And we just designed this 6 foot by 4 foot shed, and the 6 foot doors opened so that it made much bigger, sort of suggested performance space. And it was flat pack. We held it together with coach bolts and wing nuts, and it came apart and went on a trailer or in the back of a van. And we sort of wheeled it around, and he sang in it. And then other people sang in it. And within a few years, we got this sort of mobile festival thing going on, which was amazing. It was really great. So the shed has a big space in my heart, really.
So I have to say that before we talk about the mystery twigs, I was walking through with a group of students, and so I always ask them, what do you like? What don't you like? What do you understand? What don't you understand? And universally, the whole group was like, I don't get the twigs. What are the twigs about? And one student in the group said, well, when you wrap a twig up in silk, that's like sugarcoating the experience of poverty. It's like whitewashing poverty for an audience. And I was like,
that's just great.
I was like, that is a totally profound statement. I'm going to write that down.
Yeah. I'll keep that one. I'll keep that one. The twigs. That process of repetitive drawing and wrapping, and it became quite a careful thing, and I'd stitch the ends in carefully and make sure they had to be the right sort of twigs, and it had to be the right sort of fabric, and just became a bit obsessive, really, I think. And then while all of that was going on, and this happens quite a lot in my songwriting as well, where two ideas bump into each other, or two or more. And I'd been reading this statistic about the area of Stourbridge that I live in, that said that between 30 and 35% of children were living in poverty. So I was mulling that over while I was wrapping these twigs and then sort of putting little rings on them and hanging them up. And they started to take on characters. You know, they've got, some of them have got arms and legs, and some of them just sort of, they're a bit wiggly, some are fat and thin, and some are, you know, and they just started to develop little characters, because I do tend to anthropomorphise things. And then those ideas clashed, you know, and I thought, well, I'm going to work this out. And I worked out what 35% of the population, or the population of children in this area was, and came up with this number of 760. So 760 children is a large primary school in the UK. And that's an awful lot of children not having breakfast before they come to school, and not having clean clothes, and not having a hot meal, and, you know, all of those things. So I got it into my head that I needed to make 760 wrapped twigs, and you've got 50 of them here.
You know, you talked a little bit about how you felt like people weren't necessarily taking you seriously, or weren't taking the objects that you were producing there's seriously.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff going on there, isn't there? And, you know, being well, I suppose then I was in my late 40s, and I always have been a round person with grey hair, you know, like you say, it's just, and then you take in a pile of quilts, or, you know, old hankies, or things like that, you know, and it's just, what are you doing? You know, what am I supposed to be looking at here? You've just brought your sewing in.
Right.
You know? So I had a crisis of confidence, really, huge crisis of confidence about whether this was work that should be presented as art, because, you know, and then I sort of had a bit of time when I thought, maybe I should just paint. Life would be a lot easier if I just painted. But I can't paint. I'm not a painter. I'm a stitcher and a drawer.
Right.
You know, there's paint on the walls here, but it's not painting. I don't see this as painting. It's just something to draw on. So, yeah, so I didn't paint. I did persevere with the textiles, thanks to some very good tutoring.
And I think I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that if you were an 18-year-old boy on this course bringing in textiles, would have
how radical would that have been?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Textiles are still so gendered, and, you know, domestic production. So anything quilting, knitting, crochet. It doesn't really matter what serious topic you're approaching with the work.
That's right. There's always some sort of level of subversion in there that you have to sort of draw attention to in some way. But yeah,
it's a thing.
It's a thing. It's definitely a thing.
But to be able to have an exhibition like this and have someone like Colin, the wonderful Colin, create all these special mounts and take the work seriously,
absolutely,
and present it in
it's
a
been
really
brilliant,
professional way, I think.
Yes,
perhaps allows people to look at it.
Yes,
I mean, we talked a little bit about the small clothes being like sculptures, and the idea of, now they're on little pedestals, and they are little sculptural objects, and they start to lose some of that domestic reference, perhaps. Hopefully.
Yes.
I mean, the domestic reference is part of the message of the work, so it's important that it's not completely eradicated, but it can be a struggle to be an artist who sews, who also happens to be a middle-aged, middle-class woman.
Yes, yeah. I am what I am, aren't I?
Right.
I can't change any of those things. My stitching habit began young, as did the drawing. So that's what I do. That's where my voice is. That's where I feel I'm the most eloquent. Like I can't paint and make it say what I want it to say, but I can stitch an old bra.
So I guess that conveniently brings us round to the last part of the work that's not quite so evident in the show, but will be a little bit more at the opening, which is the actual voice, the performing part.
Performing bit, yes.
Who knew?
Who knew? Oh, well, I didn't. It was Dan of the Shed fame that kind of got me going, really. And when I was doing the MA, and I was looking at children's clothes then, and looking at all sorts of relationships between children and parents, and I wanted a lullaby, and it's sort of become this tale now that I tell everybody, that I said to Dan, oh, have you got a lullaby I can pinch, borrow, whatever? And he sort of went, and he said, write your own, and it hadn't occurred to me that I could write my own. So I wrote my own, and he helped me enormously with the music and the production of it, and I had this amazing piece of music that seemed to me to be magical and came out of nowhere. And then I just carried on writing, and I carried on singing, joined a band, wrote more songs, and the drawing songs thing came out of that, because whatever I listen to in the studio seems to affect how I draw. And I just thought, well, that's actually quite an interesting thing to look at, to look at doing everything all at once. Instead of doing some music and then doing some drawing, let's do it all at once. So I got some funding and did the singing and the recording and the drawing and fed everything back in as I was doing it, and ended up with drawing songs.
Do the Twigs have a song?
The Twigs at the moment have a pile of files on my computer, and they have some words, but they don't have anything. That's my main thing when I get back, is to write the song.
So if we want to know what Twigs sound like, we'll have to come to Birmingham and see their exhibition.
Oh, you know me, it'll be all over social media like a rash.
Okay.
It'll be there for everyone to see,
Oh,
whether
right.
they're there or not. It will be there, yeah. But it's not written yet, but it will be. Half of it is in my head. I know what it'll be, I think.
Awesome. Well, it's been fun for me having you here. It's been really...
Thank you for having me at home and in the gallery. It's been an amazing experience.
It's been...
The song